I was the first president of the General Assembly after the end of the Cold War that was elected and not appointed. And towards the very end of my term as president of the General Assembly, I decided to run for the position of Secretary General of the United Nations.
We do live in an era of profound transformation.
I was the first person ever to run with a public manifesto of what I will do. What would I do if I win? 53 things that I publicly promise I will change in the UN. I think that the chance was missed. He or she who wants to become Secretary General will have to solve a three-body problem. Maybe the time has come for the UN to be downsized in terms of, bureaucracy and institutional jungle.
他是史上最年轻的正球级官员，在2012年就任联合国大会主席。他在32岁就担任了塞尔维亚外长，是中国人民的老朋友，曾和我们熟悉的杨洁篪、傅莹等中国外交家谈笑风生。他就是武克耶雷米奇。得知我来自中国，欣然接受了我的专访。他思维敏捷，一针见血，很多幕后故事我也是第一次听说，完全不舍得剪掉。因此，这也是本频道有史以来最长的一期访谈视频。
I was foreign minister of Serbia. I was also in the United Nations as president of the UN General Assembly and also doing some other things. But then I left politics, domestic and international, and I found a new passion, a new higher meaning in the work that I do, and that is teaching.
2年半以前，他加入巴政这一国际顶尖学府。访谈那天，他正好要上课，我也是重新体验了一把大学生的感觉。
Nations, they like to think of themselves as eternal. They're usually very proud about their inception. They're celebrating their founding moment, the establishment of a kingdom or a republic, a revolution, for that matter. But China has no beginning. There is a very famous, important, mythical, most people believe, mythical figure in Chinese history. That is the Yellow Emperor. I am now conveying to the future generations my experiences in my previous lives or functions.
We know that you are the youngest ever UN General Assembly president. During your presidency, what's the most significant achievement?
By construct, it wasn't my idea, but I ended up being the person around. We began the negotiations on sustainable development goals. In June 2012, there was a Rio +20 conference of world leaders that actually agreed that mandate is given to the General Assembly to negotiate the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was the first time that such a complicated multilateral negotiation process was given to the General Assembly. I was the inaugural chairman of these negotiations. It was my job to set the structure that ended up with the agreement of 193 countries, 193 member states of the UN agreed on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And that was a big breakthrough. But that was the thing that came to me as a job who somebody else invented for myself. I did reasonably well, some would say. But the thing that was my doing, the thing that was my own initiative actually, was the actual election itself. I was the first president of the General Assembly after the end of the Cold War that was elected and not appointed. In other words, there was a competitive election. I actually ran against an opponent, and the end was a secret vote in the UN General Assembly of all member states, in which I won the majority vote.
Usually it's by consensus.
It's usually, it has been always by consensus ever since the end of the Cold War.
Yes.
This was the first time that this was a competitive election, and it was actually seen as a Global South candidate, that is me from Serbia, running against the Global North candidate. It was a gentleman from Lithuania, from the European Union. So it was small Serbia running against someone with the backing of the European Union, from the European Union, and it was actually a surprise result. It was the first victory of the Global South in a competitive election in the UN that set the course of discussion in the General Assembly in a direction that I believe is far more equitable, just, or if you will, democratic.
So, during your presidency, do you have any mission you feel unfinished, or do you have any regret that?
So many, as a matter of fact. Actually, the president of the General Assembly is, by protocol, the first person of the UN. It's also the most powerful on paper, and this is why the mandate is so short. This is why it lasts for only 1 year, because by the time you realize what is it that you can do as president of the General Assembly, by then, the time's gone. So, of course, as the time was, passing and the end of my term was getting closer and closer, I realized that there are so many things that need to be done in the United Nations. And towards the very end of my term as president of the General Assembly, I decided to run for the position of Secretary General of the United Nations. So I did run. I was one of the official candidates in the 2016 election. And it ended up being very close. I was the runner-up.
You're the second candidate.
I was the second guy.
Unfortunately, Antonio Guterres got more votes.
Well, it was a fair and square vote. It was the 6th round of voting, and it was very clear what I was proposing. I was a candidate of change. I even put together a document, 53 things that I publicly promise I will change in the UN if I get elected. I was the first person ever to run with a public manifesto of what I will do. And obviously, it was not to the liking of some permanent members of the Security Council, because the election is taking place in the Security Council. My election for General Assembly President was taking place in the General Assembly, where there is one country, one vote principle, and no vetoes.
Yeah.
Secretary General is elected in the Security Council.
Yes.
Where you have
secret and you have
and you have 5 countries that can essentially veto you. I ended up with 2 vetoes in the last round of voting, and I think that the chance was missed, not for me personally, but for the UN to change, because that was 2015-2016. That was the high mark. It was the high point of multilateral diplomacy. Times were, generally speaking, good in the world. Multilateral diplomacy was on the march. Some big achievements were done. Sustainable development goals were agreed. Paris Climate Treaty was negotiated. There were great...
Golden era.
It was the golden era. The time to fix the house is on a sunny day. That's the time to do work and to fix the house. It's not the time to fix the house and roof in particular when it rains. And unfortunately, metaphorically speaking now, times are now the times of rain. Now it's a rainy season.
when there's some minor problem.
Exactly. So I was advocating for a bold change to take place in 2016, when everybody was more or less on the same page. Right now, under the current conditions, under the current geopolitical tensions, it is hardly imaginable that there could be consensus necessary for things to be changed, and therefore UN remains unreformed and in a way stuck.
So will you run again for the next election, the Secretary General election?
The next Secretary General election is taking place next year.
Yes.
And there is a wide expectation that it is Latin America's turn, because it's not a written rule. It's a rule that the regions, they go one after another. I mean, it's not set in stone. And in the 2016 election, when I ran, it was the Eastern European turn. This is why the majority of candidates were from Eastern Europe. However, a Western European ended up elected, so it's no rule. But there is a widespread expectation that somebody from Latin America need to be elected this time.
If you have any suggestion, any recommendation for the future Secretary General?
I have a lot of recommendations and I have a lot of advice that I could give both in the campaign, because I ran a campaign, I ran a campaign and it ended up being almost successful because it's a very complicated and convoluted and not terribly transparent process. So he or she should really concentrate on the permanent members of the Security Council because this is where the mechanics of the election lies. And not even all 5, I would say, although all 5 have a theoretically chance to stop your candidacy by throwing a veto against you. But the 3, in my opinion, the 3 out of 5 are really, really, really important given the current snapshot of
US, China, Russia?
US, China, and Russia, which is a tricky triangle. In a way, he or she who wants to become Secretary General will have to solve a 3-body problem. 3-body problem, you know from China what a 3-body problem is. It's a very popular thing in China, but you know, getting the support from the P3, US, China, and Russia would be essentially solving of a 3-body problem. You must be, in my opinion, very, very realistic when it comes to what can be achieved. In 2016, I believe that so many things could have been achieved, but I think that that chance is missed. Not because somebody else got elected Secretary General, it's because the world relations, and especially the geopolitics, so there is not much trust, not enough cooperation between the big players. And in the absence of that, there is a limited number of things you can do in the UN. Because UN, after all, is a club of member states. It is up to the member states to decide how they want to use the club. And if the member states choose not to work with each other, there is very little you can do. You can hope that they're going to come to a better arrangement between themselves in the future. But in reality, you're there to serve the common needs and the common denominator. Now, the common denominator is very small. Well, concentrate on what can be done. Maybe the time has come for the UN to be downsized in terms of, bureaucracy and institutional jungle of agencies that have been, growing over the past decades. Maybe the world needs less investment financially, but more true and honest engagement institutionally to make it more efficient, to make it more effective. And quite honestly, forget about the UN solving future problems between the big powers. This is not possible. You cannot be forcing big powers one way or the other way. And the great reminder of this is the composition of the Security Council of the UN. It's not really fair and square. And there are some important countries that are missing, mainly for the reason of not being in existence at the time when in 1945 the UN was created, because at that time they were colonies. But for as long as you have this composition of the Security Council that does not reflect in full the realities of the globe of the third decade of the 21st century, you can't really hope to credibly say, oh, well, we are the place where the world is led. It's not.
Just curious, how exactly to run the campaign? And you say there's not transparent indeed. The only thing I know is you have to get enough vote in General Assembly, and also you need to get enough.
No, not General Assembly.
Council.
Forget General Assembly.
Yeah.
For the Secretary General, it's the only it's only the Security Council, and the Security Council passes only one name to the General Assembly. It's just a rubber stamping in the General Assembly. In order to be elected in the Security Council, you need to have, like for every other resolution, because essentially it's the resolution of the Security Council, resolution to recommend this and this person to the General Assembly. So all rules of procedure of the Security Council apply. In other words, you need to have 9 at least positive votes and no negative votes from any of the P5 in order to become Secretary General. And given the difficult relationship between the P5, let's say, at this moment, my advice to whoever runs right now would be try and be everybody's second choice. It is important never to become anybody's first choice. Because if you become someone's first choice, any of the P5, by automation, another P5 is going to veto you on general principle. So the best advice to people running is be everybody's second choice and try and not appear too much in the general public and in the media, because media is not going to vote for you. General public is not going to vote for you. There are only 15 people who are important. They're ambassadors in the UN, which receive instruction from their capital as to how to vote. So concentrate on those 15. Nobody else matters at this stage. And the less public appearance, the better, because you're only opening up for a eventuality to slip, to say something that is not ideal. And the fact that we're having this interview means that I'm probably not running. If I were running,
I will vote
I'd
for
be.
you.
Thank you.
But I
Thank
don't
you.
have to vote. You cooperated with many Chinese diplomats, Fu Ying,
Yes.
Yang Jiechi.
Yang Jiechi. He was my counterpart. I was foreign minister at the time when Minister Yang was foreign minister. We actually became foreign ministers on the same day.
Oh,
It was May 15, 2007. Both he and I became foreign ministers on the same day. I was a few years younger than him, but
you met him like
several
many
times.
times.
Many
Several,
times,
yeah.
many times. I also worked closely with his brother.
Yang Jiemin.
Yes, and he was my guest in Belgrade. I've been privileged to travel several times to China and to make many friends in China.
Do you have any interesting story you could share?
Many. One of the things which I'm very proud of that were achieved during my time as foreign minister of Serbia, we liberalized travel.
Visa-free.
Visa-free travel, established
ever
visa-free travel
European country.
between Europe and China. Well, first European country that did it with China was Serbia, and it was done as my initiative that I discussed with Foreign Minister Yang in the first meeting that he and I had, and we worked closely together, of course, with the rest of our two respective governments. And then in just a few years time, we did this. So it's been for over a decade now that Chinese citizens can travel without visa to Serbia and Serbian citizens without visa to China. And it often happens in international airports. When I go to China, when they're checking in and they're looking through my passport and saying, oh, where's your Chinese visa? I say, we don't need a visa to go to China. And they say, really? And then they go check and then say, oh, it's actually the case. Not many countries in the world have this privileged travel relationship. I was the guy who instigated it as a foreign minister, and I'm very, very pleased that it worked out.
I think even today, Serbia and China shares a very good relationship.
Excellent relationship.
In
I think it is the first. Serbia is the first European country that formally embraced the concept to build together with China the community for the joint future, for the shared future for the mankind. So Serbia actually signed up to this formally. You know, there can be a change of government in Serbia, but there is no change of direction when it comes to Serbia-China relationship.
So we attended your course and about especially particularly the Taiwan issue. So what's your opinion on Taiwan issue, and how actually do you think European countries should deal with China on that topic?
Well, for somebody who comes from Serbia, and also for somebody who comes with a background in multilateral diplomacy in the UN in particular, there is essentially no doubt whatsoever that it is the government in Beijing that is the only legitimate representative of the Chinese state and the Chinese people. The civil war that was fought in the aftermath of the Second World War in China. But I believe that this delicate issue is going to come to a natural conclusion. There is only one China, and there is only one way in which the reunification can occur. And I said to my students, from the little I know about China's history, this is one constant theme, one of the constant themes in Chinese statehood. This constant, push for reunification. 5,000 years of history were years in which there were some tough times and some good times, right? And the tough times were about division, and the good times were about unification. So I believe that the good times are ahead, but there are dangers. There are dangers emanating out of the geopolitical recessionary cycle. We live in a geopolitical recession. I personally believe that geopolitics is like economics, cyclical. And that there are good periods followed by bad periods. In economics, you know exactly what they are. They're quantifiable. So you know when you are in a recession, lasts for a few quarters, and then you go out of recession. In geopolitics, it's also cyclical. The only difference is that cycles are much longer. They tend to last for decades. And we are definitely in a negative geopolitical cycle. And inside such a cycle, there are tensions, there are provocations, there are developments that are not necessarily aimed at, starting a war or a conflict, but they end up starting a conflict. In Europe, for instance, we had this experience of the early 20th century, 1914, when nobody really wanted a war, and then it just ended up happening, the First World War. So I think that this is a cautionary tale for developments in East Asia. And related to Taiwan in particular, I think that there may be people and interests and actors who would seek to provoke friction. So I fear that they may be actors, individuals, groups of individuals, representative of certain interests that would seek to shake things up. Not necessarily with the aim of, starting a military confrontation, but then, from time to time, things get out of hand. So I think that we should be cautious as we move forward. I think that we should be mindful of each other's sensitivities and red lines, diplomatically speaking. And when it comes to the one China policy, that is very much of a red line, important red line for China. And I think that other international actors ought to be mindful of that. Last week, in Europe, we had this incident of a very high-level functionary from Taipei, the number 2, basically, giving a speech to the European Parliament, to the section of the European Parliament, which is a very, very tricky thing. It was a diplomatic ambush, to be honest, and it was done with an explicit aim to provoke escalatory diplomatic and economic action between China and Europe. And I hope it doesn't happen, because if it does happen, then the provocateurs would have won in their intention. And in my opinion, quite ludicrous. Not even the US is doing anything similar
Indeed.
to that. Nobody has invited anybody from Taipei to give a speech in the Congress of the United States, which one would expect before European Parliament, doing it. Yet it was the European Parliament that did it. And again, I think it was very regrettable. It was a direct provocation. China has not responded in an escalatory fashion, at least not so far. And I hope that this doesn't play into the hands of those who want to destroy and complicate relations between Europe and China.
So, in general, what do you think about the future of multilateralism? Because you say 10 years ago that's the golden era, and today we're facing many problems. So what about the future, like a decade after? Do you think in general it's positive, or it's...
I don't think that the geopolitical recession is going to be over anytime soon, because, as I said, cycles in geopolitics tend to be longer than economy. And we are now in a recession that started a few years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it's not going to be over soon. And in the geopolitical recession, multilateral cooperation and international organizations in particular, multilateral organizations in particular, are victims of such situations. They come across as slow, ineffective, not fit for purpose, not really delivering the global goods that they are expected to deliver. And they diverge more and more from the reality of the division of power in the world, the reality in terms of what are the new needs and the pressing needs from humanity for international organizations. So what do you do? What do you do when the rules of the road are no longer corresponding to the realities on the road, which is the case, for instance, with the United Nations? Well, there are three things you can do. Number one is to try and reform the United Nations and other international multilateral organizations so that they are better fit for purpose under the new circumstances. So reform is one thing. Second thing is to build new organizations or double down in engagement in alternative organizations, not necessarily global, that are better functioning for certain things that you want to do as a matter of your national priority. If the UN is stuck, then do things, I don't know, in BRICS or in ASEAN, or if you're a European country within the EU, or if you're an African country within the African Union. So that's the second thing. First was reform. Second thing was alternative. And then the third thing is take things into your own hands and do things unilaterally as you see fit, which is regrettable, but it's happening. I mean, if a country sees something as a matter of its national urgency and priority, especially when it comes to security matters, countries will be doing things unilaterally, large or small. So I think that the next 10 years are going to be the mix of three: reform, alternatives, and unilateralism. These are the three things that will be occurring concurrently. As a guy who believes in multilateral diplomacy, I hope that the third stream will be the least utilized, that the first and the second are going to be utilized more. And I think that the role of China is very important there, especially when it comes to the reform of the UN. In general, when it comes to reform, China is a very credible actor. China's reforms, domestic reforms, of course, but reforms in general have been exceptionally successful. arguably the most successful development project in human history in terms of how long it lasted and how many people it touched in terms of improving their livelihoods, right? So China is a big reformer. China is a champion of reform. China should be the champion of reform in the international organizations. It's not going to be easy because it requires consensus. It requires support from those who not necessarily see themselves as China's allies and partners, but one ought to be patient and working slowly and determinedly towards a certain goal. And the goal, in my opinion, should be a reformed and revitalized system of multilateral international cooperation.
Do you have any message you want to convey to the young people in China? What they should do, what they can do for multilateralism or global governance?
Well, first and foremost, do follow this channel. It's actually a very good channel to follow and a great place to get information about what is really going on in the world, in multilateral diplomacy, in international organizations, and in the world in general. I hope that the next generation in China and elsewhere in the world is going to remain interested in global cooperation, and not just global cooperation through, I don't know, virtual reality or, trade and commerce, but people-to-people contacts are absolutely essential. Nothing can replace people-to-people contact in international relations, in diplomacy, and there is very little you can achieve without talking to each other in general, but without talking to each other face to face in particular. And therefore, the more personal engagement with your peers and friends abroad, the better the outlook for the future. And China carries a great responsibility for the future, being one of the most consequential and powerful actors in the world of today and in the world of tomorrow.
Thank you.
Festivities in China that I witnessed that I will never forget. One is Shanghai opening, Shanghai Expo opening, and of course the other one was the opening of the Beijing Olympics.
Oh, yeah.
There was a really spectacular thing. I remember it, I will forever remember it, and not just because it was a beautiful, ceremony. It was August 8th, 2008. It was a date when the three big things that I believe are at the heart of the reason why we now have this tense situation in the world, they all come into play in one day. Well, essentially, there were three things that America led after the end of the Cold War that had great consequences. One was Russia was left out of the new order. Mm-hmm. And, it ended up the way it ended up. We now have this situation. Secondly, China was enthusiastically embraced, which accelerated the process of the rise. The rise at a speed that nobody anticipated it would be possible. The idea of America wasn't like, China slowly and peacefully rising and never, coming anywhere close to the US. I mean, it was not imagined, it was not envisaged that China is going to become on par.
Indeed.
Or even ahead in certain areas of the United States. But anyway, China was, unlike Russia, China was closely embraced. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing was that there was such an enormous greed in the West when it comes to globalization. And it created some real structural deficiencies in the Western societies that led to many people, especially in the middle class, being like left behind, or feeling like they're left behind. You know,
More right-wing.
exactly. So those were the three things: Russia out, China in, and a lot of greed, right? And on August 8th, you had all three playing at the same time, spectacularly. August 8th was the day when Russia invaded Georgia, as a result of them not being listened to.
Yes.
And their concerns. So on August 8th, Russia invaded Georgia during the opening of
Yeah,
the
we know
Olympics. Number two, China was back. The August 8th Olympic opening was a very, vivid symbol, powerful symbol that China is back. And then, believe it or not, on the same day, the first fractures in the books of Lehman Brothers.
I don't know that.
It was on that day.
I don't know, but yeah.
It was on that day that they paused trading in the Lehman Brothers, the financial meltdown and the great global crisis that actually started off.
这是我采访的第一位正球级大佬，风趣幽默，十分健谈。我们事后还聊了聊他的中文名字，一般呢把它翻译为武克。他问我怎么样，我说虽然这确实是一个通用译名，但武者歌也，词源是古代中国的兵器，主征伐，有勇猛之意。口天吴寓意言辞有力，或许也不错。在节目的最后，不如交给大家来评价，看看是武克好还是吴克好。回头我转告给外长阁下，这可是难得的给大佬取名字的机会，大家不要错过呀。